Perfect. Good morning, members. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm excited to be moderating this panel on Partners in Policy. And with me on stage are Brett, Sarah, and Morva. Today we're going to be discussing what successful collaboration between different groups in the crypto policy space looks like, what are some of the challenges that accompany those kinds of partnership opportunities, and then I think we'll also turn to looking at different issues that are, coming up in the next year that really deserve some of the attention from a partnership opportunity. And just finishing up with ways to communicate between groups about when you need help and when to call in the cavalry, so to speak. So if the panelists want to go ahead and introduce themselves and the organization they represent, your role there, and then how long you've been in crypto, that would be great.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm Brett Quick, Head of Government Affairs at the Crypto Council for Innovation. The Crypto Council is a global alliance of some of the most sophisticated companies in the crypto space. I have been in crypto for just shy of 4 months. So I came from TradFi, as many of us did probably at this point. Really excited to be here today. Thanks, Sarah.
Great. Sarah Roth-Gaudette and Fight for the Future, Executive Director. Yeah, thanks for having us here, and the timing is perfect, I think, and excited to get into this conversation with my panelists. But Fight for the Future, broadly speaking, we're fighting for technology to be a force for equality and empowerment, freedom of expression, rather than oppression and tyranny. We have been one of the most active digital rights organizations in the Web3 space, probably most well known for our massively viral campaign at don'tkillcrypto.com during the infrastructure bill, where we helped to generate more than 40,000 calls to Congress in just a few days. Been following the technology really from early days, but primarily focused just broadly on digital rights.
That's amazing. So my name is Morva Rohani, and I'm the Executive Director at the Canadian Web3 Council. We're an industry, a not-for-profit trade association representing Web3 companies in Canada to policymakers in Canada. I have been in crypto double the time that Brett's been in crypto, around 8 months, and I used to lobby for technology companies, but very different, more at the intersection of the physical and the digital. I was at Uber for a few years, so parallels in terms of understanding how to take new things, new scary things to government and helping shape policy, but very, very different industry.
Well, I feel like you guys all represent fighters in the industry. You're pushing forward good crypto policy and other, Web3 policy more generally. You all have your own mission for your organizations, but you've definitely collaborated with other groups in the past. And I'd love to know what are some of the reasons that call for collaboration, why is it needed? And maybe if you can speak to how, as either like an international organization in the US or an domestic trade association, or, sorry, new to this, Fight for the Future can get involved, that would be great.
I can go first, kind of speaking as the only person who's not based in this jurisdiction. I've thought a lot about, how can we be helpful in efforts here, because obviously US is one of our biggest trading partners, and what happens there, and Canadian governments are always looking to what's happening in the US. I think the most immediate thing I can think of is just obviously like sharing notes, sharing our experience. We have such a fragmented state of, the regulatory framework from a global perspective right now, which means that in some places, some policy issues are further ahead in some places, some policy issues are further behind. The most immediate example I can think of is like crypto ETFs have been a thing in Canada since 2021. And regulators in Canada talk about that a lot. Like, look, we did this, we did great on this, but that was actually a 3-year or 4-year battle that was battled out in court with the Ontario Securities Commission. And I think we have a lot of insights to share about those efforts that led to that product being available in Canada. But we also have a lot of data and a lot of expertise to share about how we got there. So I think just sharing experiences, sharing outcomes is the best way to collaborate and the best way we can be useful to each other.
Sure, I can jump in. I think civil society organizations have an incredibly important role to play, and we need a lot more of them to represent public interest or user interest in the space. I think what we've been able to bring is a human rights lens and analysis to the space. That has been, very welcome in DC, and we have been able to leverage a lot of our relationships through campaigns we ran, say for net neutrality or facial recognition technology. We, as an activism and advocacy organization, we obviously, as we saw with the infrastructure bill, have an ability to do, grassroots mobilizations at sometimes a very large scale, if we can get the moment exactly right. And then we just have a long history of working on financial privacy. I mean, we're just one organization, and there are many that bring different experiences and perspectives potentially to the space. But for us, that's from the kind of early crypto wars to the Patriot Act. We, for 10 years, have been engaged in these issues, and I think we're one of the few organizations that really see financial privacy as fundamental to human rights as well. We see from our perspective that financial transactions are often used to persecute some of the most marginalized groups, whether that's sex workers that are having their accounts frozen, or just recently Senator Wyden unearthed a massive illegal ICE program that was gathering troves of data about people wiring money, so disproportionately targeting immigrants and lower income people. And there's a growing concern generally that we're seeing, especially across the sort of more progressive civil society space, that financial privacy and surveillance will be used to criminalize abortion.
I'll just add a little bit to what my fellow panelists highlighted. I think pulling back a little bit about the question on the need for coordination and the reasons why we would collaborate, I think it's important to remember that the advocacy apparatus of crypto is very new. And you mentioned the infrastructure bill, that it's sort of widely held belief, right, that the infrastructure bill sort of the wake-up call to crypto, and everyone understood, okay, we're not at the table, we're on the menu, or whatever the saying is. And so there became sort of broad recognition that we need to be engaging with policymakers, and we need to do it in a sophisticated and coordinated way. And I think we've made incredible strides over the past year or so in developing some of that. But you have to think about, other industries that have been sort of lobbying for decades. They have really sophisticated systems set up to build coalitions and build consensus on issues and establish champions, because everyone's sort of rowing in the same direction. And I think that's something that crypto's still working on. I think we're making a ton of progress. But as everyone knows that, interacts with the Hill and with members of Congress, they have a lot on their plates, especially in the Senate. They could be members of several committees with a lot of really high level, really prominent issues that they're working on. So they sort of need industry and stakeholders to have a kind of collective view about the consequences of proposed policies, about the benefits, and it's more difficult for them when there's a lot of fragmentation amongst industry. Some of that can't be avoided. Everyone sort of has different priorities. At some point, there's a divergence that you can't avoid, but to the extent that you can identify what really unites industry and what is workable and favorable, and get behind that, then it makes the process a lot smoother. So I think we're making a lot of progress there.
Well, speaking of the infrastructure bill, I feel like it was a good example of successful coordination between groups. And Sarah, I'd love if you could talk about what aspects of these efforts led to their success and maybe how we can replicate them in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree with Brett that it's it takes time, right? On the infrastructure bill, if that had happened, I think a few years earlier, we wouldn't have been able to pull together like we did in that moment. I think that there's work to be done. I think in between those sort of big inflection points to find common ground. We're focused on because we're a campaigning organization, we're focused on finding campaigns that we think will bring together and align user interests with business interests, that was just a key. That was the infrastructure bill. So just to say generally, I think I agree that it is something that we have to sort of keep building towards and to seize these different inflection points as they come up, different opportunities and threats to the space. But that was a great moment, because I think for us, we had worked on the FinCEN travel rule and the expansion of financial surveillance in the space, which is just aligns really very much with a lot of our history working on financial surveillance and surveillance generally. And so we were connected to some of the other folks like Coin Center and Blockchain Association. And so when that, hastily written and, pay for came up on the infrastructure bill, we were able to kind of quickly gather together. What's helpful in a moment like that is when it's about just, this is a terribly written and will have terrible repercussions for people like software developers working on projects, just clear, bright line that we could all say, this just shouldn't be happening here. For us, that's the message that, law that affects the future of the internet shouldn't be added, at the very last minute to a must-pass bill. That's very straightforward messaging, and there was a very clear line. So I think that was part of why we were able to mobilize so quickly. And then we, have battle-tested tools that we were able to just deploy quickly. We, knew that we could pull together as many of the companies, Blockchain Association members, and their policy folks saw that there was an opportunity that, that they could help spread the word to their users and customers. Obviously, there was a viral moment on crypto Twitter, which was extremely helpful. But it could have been a moment where everybody was just tweeting, right? And instead, it became a moment where folks were actually making calls into Congress. Everybody was using all the contacts that they had in DC to, on both sides of the aisle, to alert folks to this provision and just how untenable it was. So yeah, I think it's a great case study for sure.
And Morva, I know Canada has different laws and a different government structure than the U.S., but I'm sure you face similar issues when you're trying to rally your members, and I wonder what it's like for you to try to get alignment on messaging with them, and then how you reach out to other organizations and try to find ways to collaborate, and even if it's across borders or if it's just within Canada as well.
Yeah, thank you, and that's really amazing, Sarah. I would say we've actually, and I was surprised at first because I'm new to the industry and our members are so diverse. I mean, they range from exchanges to core developers in the space to infrastructure providers. But we've actually found a lot of room for alignment so far, at least among the sector, just because Canada is so behind from a policy perspective right now that everybody wants the same base level. We can all agree on the same core principles at least, and I think leaning into core principles is the best way to get that alignment, and getting people to focus on the long-term vision is another way to get alignment across and get everybody to move on from their individual interests. I can't cite a particular example so far because we only launched back in March, and like I mentioned, the policy conversation in Canada is so nascent around crypto right now. But I can tell you that we're not waiting for the moment to react, and to pull ourselves together last minute. We're as you mentioned, we're trying our best to learn from others, to make connections with others in other countries, and to learn from their lessons. Obviously, watching what's happening in the US very closely, and seeing all the great collaboration that's happening between different organizations here. But also for us as a country, as the only country in the world with 13 different securities regulators, we kind of have to look at it as we're trying to, harmonization is a big issue for us. So I've personally been watching developments in Europe very closely because I'd say in terms of the core issues, we have more parallels there because we need to get harmonization across so many regulators. And so I was actually in Portugal recently with the European Crypto Initiative, trying to take notes on how that 2-year battle and how they got alignment across the board between their local associations as well as industry. So I'd say we're more in a learning phase right now, but because we haven't even established the core foundations in Canada, it's right now my job is easy.
That's fair. Brett, I know that you're new to crypto, but you have an established track record in GR. And I was wondering from a GR perspective how important it is for an industry to have a unified voice in Congress and to present like a unified front on different issues. And I was just wondering if there are any challenges that you think exist that are specific to the crypto industry when it comes to messaging, knowing there are educational hurdles on the Hill and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll go back to what I was describing before. I think that there are some growing pains associated with establishing a really collaborative system amongst a sort of new and burgeoning sector. but I think we've made some incredible strides to do that. I completely agree. Having a unified voice with Congress and with the agencies is critical to advancing the most favorable policy priorities that impact the industry. And I think that we're getting there. The Crypto Council had the opportunity to partner with the Blockchain Association on an economic impact study to really look at how crypto is becoming more widespreadly adopted throughout the U.S. And we'll use those results to sort of track how crypto is developing and how it's sort of growing amongst communities and individuals in the U.S. So that's a good example of a way that we can work together on something that the data from which will be important to lawmakers and to policymakers as they're sort of thinking about their positions on things. And there are a lot of opportunities for that, and I think that we're identifying them as we sort of go along. Obviously, there's been a ton of debate on the Hill recently around the DCCPA and stablecoin legislation, and as is often the case with things, the devil's always in the details, right? And we certainly find ourselves in places where we really have to get into the weeds and come up with what can sort of be the consensus view that we can all sort of live with. And I think it's important to think about not allowing perfect to be the enemy of good, but also identifying where the really bright line is on where something truly isn't workable. And that's a really difficult task, and it takes a lot of people really putting their heads together to determine, I think, where those lines are. But I think we're making a lot of progress. I think, we have some amazing folks in the industry. Obviously, I'm one of the newer ones. And it's been great to sort of get to know everybody that's working kind of around the clock on these issues.
As I'm sure you've seen crypto Twitter recently with everything that's been going on with FTX. I know I've been doom scrolling a little bit, and that's rare for me. I'm not usually on Twitter very often. So I was wondering how you all sort through all the noise and, whether it's what's coming out of regulatory agencies, whether it's coming out of the Hill, news, crypto, Twitter and Signal. I think there's just so many outlets for information in the crypto space. So how do you guys distill, what's the most important issue at hand right now? How are you guys prioritizing and strategizing?
I can start. You make a very good point. There's a lot of noise around crypto. And I'll say, just speaking anecdotally about my own experience, I'm new to Twitter as well. And I've had to sort of get acclimated with crypto Twitter and everything that, it's a 24-hour news cycle on Twitter, of course. It's really important to be able to filter out the noise. And to your point, there's a lot of different platforms on which everyone communicates and a lot of different ways that information is shared. And with crypto, in particular, there's just so much going on at any moment, both in the US and in other jurisdictions, both from a firm-specific standpoint and also what's happening from a legislative and regulatory standpoint. So there's a lot to distill, but I think that's part of a successful advocacy effort is you have to filter out the noise and you have to identify what matters. There's always going to be a ton of sort of extraneous issues that are happening, but being able to sort of identify the key objectives and prioritize them and coalesce around those, that's sort of how we'll achieve, I think, meaningful, thoughtful regulation that, the Crypto Council certainly supports.
You got some thoughts?
Sure. I'd say I'll speak more to the role of advocacy organizations in that. I mean, obviously being able to pinpoint the most relevant information is one thing, but also being timely in kind of dispelling, if we see a group spiraling on Twitter about an issue, which we actually saw recently in Canada, one of the exchanges registered with the Ontario Securities Commission, and so and because we have different rules across the country, they had to change their rules, and then everybody thought, oh, there's new rules now, which wasn't the case. So we had to step in and right away say, no, this has been in place for a year. This is how we got here, and this is what we're doing about it. So I think what I think is most important, I mean, being able to decipher what's important is certainly the case, certainly really important, but also being able to step in and provide clarity and provide that fact checking is definitely the job of the organizations that we have, and doing it in a timely manner, because I've been on Twitter, fortunately or unfortunately, for very long, and things can misinformation or miscommunications or misunderstandings about what the government is doing happen so easily online, and that's because and it was very hard for me as a career lobbyist to understand that for a long time, but But that's because people don't know how the government communicates. The government is just on Twitter now, but it's kind of our job to be able to like make those connections, but in a really timely way.
Yeah, I agree on all those points. And I would concur that I think, we rely upon Blockchain Association or Coin Center or others to to do some of the key policy analysis, but we are running everything through sort of the human rights lens and our own analysis, and so I think that's an important piece. And we're working with the ACLU that has their own analysis, so I think it is critical that we're all working together. That's what this panel is all about. I do think that, I would just say, please get in touch with us. We'd love to be in touch with more member companies. We are, often putting together where we see user interests, and human rights and business interests align. We're looking for those opportunities and building a growing network of folks that we can reach out to. We just a few months ago launched our campaign at nospycash.com, which is focused on CBDCs and what are the bright lines that we would need to see, and we're doing it along with the ACLU. And I think there are, member companies that would be interested in engaging on that. And, we're also thinking sort of strategically about how to use these moments or these campaigns. This one will be more of a slow burn than, say, the infrastructure bill, but to broaden the coalition. And that one in particular, I think, we have the opportunity to bring along a lot more civil society organizations who maybe aren't sure what they think about crypto, but CBDC sure does sound scary. And then also, another example would be we're focused on with the new Congress, a open letter that we're hoping will be from privacy-focused tools and projects and companies and organizations, really laying out what's critical about privacy and anonymity and what are some of the broader principles that we want them to take into account. And we're hoping that will really be a big tent coalition that can include all kinds of privacy technology-focused projects, whether that's Signal or Mozilla, or Zcash. So.
Well, quickly before we wrap up, I'd love to know what you guys think are some of the policy issues that we'll need to partner on to address in the coming year. I know there's been a lot happening in the last week, so if you choose to speak about FTX, I would love for you to try to find something more specific and narrow that you think is, part of the messaging or, what's really, needs to be unlocked with this partnership.
Sure. I think what's important to think about, given the recent headlines that we've seen and everything that's developed over the past week, we want to make sure that the policy is not reactive to a bad actor, to something that's gone wrong in the industry. We've seen that a lot in financial regulation with Dodd-Frank, with Sarbanes-Oxley, with going all the way back to FIREA in the late 80s. We often get big, meaningful pieces of legislation that really impact the sector and the industry in response to a crisis or something that's happened and impacted consumers and investors. We've obviously been advocating for thoughtful regulation to be brought to the industry for a while now, so that won't change. But I think it's probably prudent for there to be a pause to think about what really is the best framework that applies to the industry that would prevent bad actors from accessing the market. So I think we'll continue to advocate for those policies, but I do think that we're sort of at a moment of really reassessing what makes the most sense. Because for the Crypto Council, as is the case with other organizations as well, we were really established to advance a regulatory framework in the United States that keeps innovation here in the US and creates jobs and promotes growth of the industry, but allows the industry to innovate and flourish and doesn't stifle any of that. But a really important piece of that is providing protection to consumers and investors, because if they don't have that confidence in the industry, then I think widespread adoption becomes more difficult. So we'll continue to advocate for that, but I think it's fair that everyone's sort of having some of these conversations about what makes the most sense going forward and what the timing looks like, because we do have sort of one opportunity to get this right. Whenever a huge piece of legislation in finance is passed, it typically takes years before there's any meaningful changes to it. So it's important that we get the right policies sort of implemented now.
How about you guys quickly? I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time, so I would just say +1 to all of that. Thoughtful, careful approach will be needed. And I do think there's another moment happening at the same time around, Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, and I think there's a lot of interest in what are alternative spaces, what people migrating to Mastodon, or potential for something like Blue Sky. So I think that will be an important kind of cultural moment to also hopefully highlight the need for decentralized alternatives. Maybe that will partly help to mitigate FTX.
I'll just say really quickly, speaking as a organization from outside of the U.S., my one takeaway from the last week or so is we have a collective responsibility to hold each other accountable. Which means that if monitoring what different companies or different organizations are doing in different jurisdictions and taking seriously our collective reputations and regulatory relationships in other jurisdictions, even if we haven't been compelled to do so yet. So investing equally in your regulatory affairs and relationships in Canada or in Europe as you have in the US, if you have not done so already, doing it now, because we do have to be proactive, and we do have to make sure that, from an international perspective, we're protecting our industry's reputation.
Well, thank you all for all of your thoughts and insights, and we look forward to working with your organizations in the future.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.